So today we're doing as many turrets as possible, but also not possible because we're not doing Helion. We're just doing Bleak Watcher mainly, and yeah, we're using Getaway Artist with Finality's Augur. I do think the Rune Scribe's Forge is what Helion could be. Obviously, it's maybe a little too strong for Helion as an ability. Maybe somewhere down the line that gets a buff, and maybe adding Helion to this build is viable. But as of the recording of this video, Bleak Watcher and the Arc Soul turret from Getaway Artists are the best, and the interaction with Prismatic being you consume Storm Grenade and you spawn both a Stasis turret and your Arc Soul. I mean, that's just so strong. This build in and of itself is really strong. So if I took off Finality's Augur and say I used Parasite instead, this build is still going to be fine. I mean, I'm not really building into turrets, not that you need to, but again, this build will function really well no matter what weapon you decide to use, which is why we do have another weapon you can use if you want the fantasy of having a bunch of turrets. But this, I think, is maybe one of the best in the game. So how are we building into the turrets? Well, obviously, we're going to have Bleak Watcher on, right? But we're also going to have Feed the Void so that we are basically unkillable. I mean, it's not impossible to die. It's just hard, especially in normal activities. Your melee, as well as regular grenade kills or Bleak Watcher kills, will count towards Devour. Now, you can throw on basically any melee you want. I do enjoy Arcane Needle because you can do it from afar. It procs Radiant, and you have 3 charges of it. So you can get Radiant pretty much whenever you want. And Phoenix Dive on because it's just a quick way to heal yourself. Of course, you can throw on a Rift or something else if that, well, actually you can only throw on Rifts, but you can throw on Empowering or Healing depending on which you prefer. And for Fragments, I would say the most important for this build is Facet of Balance, because with Facet of Balance, rapidly defeating targets with light damage will grant you melee energy, so it's going to be feeding into our melee. And more importantly, with darkness damage, I'm using Tanash's mastery here for stasis, so that's how we're somewhat building into that, and of course Bleak Watcher, so that will give us our grenade energy back. So we're basically going to have the ability to spawn the Bleak Watcher and the Arc Soul whenever we want. Everything else here is built into either extra damage, as you can see here with Facet of Courage, because we're always going to have either Radiant or Amplified or Devour up, so we're always going to be doing extra damage to the targets that are afflicted with Slow or Freeze from our Bleak Watcher, which is, it can be nice, again, getting Radiant from our melees and making our allies Radiant, as well as Facet of Protection, so that when we're in a clump of adds, we have a little bit more tankiness. And Facet of Purpose, if you're making a decent amount of orbs. Of course, there are some other stuff you can swap out. If you decide to use a kinetic weapon, you could swap on Facet of Grace, Facet of Command, because you will be freezing a ton of targets. You could also think about Facet of Devotion, because you will be defeating a ton of stasis afflicted debuffed targets. That's a mouthful. So plenty of options here, and I do have Song of Flame just because I think it's one of the better options. It's probably the best for this build. Say maybe you don't have your grenade up, you just pop your super, but most of the time you're going to have your grenade up. This build is insane. So for armor mods, as you can see, the most important here are going to be on our arms with Impact Induction. Causing damage with a powered melee attack reduces your grenade cooldown. Grenade Kickstart, because we will have some armor charge when we're picking up those orbs. That'll help us get our grenade back a little bit faster. And then Fastball, I mean, I didn't have any more room here, but let's say, I take this down, you could throw on another Impact Induction if you wanted to, or another Grenade Kickstart, whatever you want to put on there. And then your resists are going to match basically whatever. For this, you might want to run like 1 Innervation. The Recuperation is just nice for healing if you're in a really easy activity that isn't super hard and you just want to be able to spawn as many turrets as possible. 2 Innervations would be nice. A Bomber on your class item, and then Powerful Attraction to pick up some orbs when you're Phoenix diving, and then whatever else you see fit. The armor mods are too important because everything we're doing here in our subclass is for the most part going to build into getting everything back. And you know, the nice thing with this build is I'm going to show you some gameplay now. You basically always have your raw abilities up, and you're probably saying, how is this engaging to do? How is it fun to use a build with only turret? Because you're managing your abilities still. And obviously in things like the Master Lost Sector I'm showing you, you still have to be aware of champions and stun them properly and making sure you're killing them and focusing them down when they spawn. Otherwise, yeah, they're like an overload's just going to keep teleporting. You might stun it, but it's not going to die until you focus your attention on it. What this build does more so is it's fantastic for crowd control, because you can just shoot your Finality's Augur into the air. It's generally just going to target whatever, but if you are focusing a champion or a boss down, you can paint it with the laser while you're still in the create turret mode, and that will focus the target you're shooting at. So again, if it's a champion or a boss, you slap that on, you do damage with your other weapons, swap back to Finalities, and if it's not dead by then, you can do a little bit of damage with Finalities in its linear form and probably finish off whatever you're shooting at. You're still going to use your other weapons. It's not just going to be Finalities Augur and the turret. You know, Tenacious for popping barriers, or you know, maybe a sniper if you want to use a sniper instead. I was using Noxious Vetiver for the jolting feedback, but I could also stun champions with that as well. Of course, the nice thing about this build is you can get Radiant from your melee, and your turret is going to slow inherently. It can also stun unstops, as you can shatter them after you freeze, even though it's not the most effective, and you can stun champions with Finality's Augur if you have the mod on. You know, it's still something you can do in a later season if you choose to do that, but mostly it's nice to have the slow to just slow down combatants in general, and of course stun lock overloads essentially. While you're doing all this weapon rotation and whatnot, you're also using your abilities, right? You're popping that grenade, spawning your Bleak Watcher and your Arc Soul. Maybe after that you throw an Arcane Needle at something to proc your Radiant, and you know, then you're shooting your guns while you have all these turrets up, and focusing everything down, and it's so easy to use this build. It's kind of brain dead, I will admit. It's not super brain dead, because if you're not paying attention, like I said, this build isn't just going to do the work for you. There are some things you're going to have to pay attention to, and you can still die in this build, but you are probably as close to invincible as you can get. And again, the Finality's Augur turret's going to take care of a lot. The Stasis turret is going to freeze them, and your Arc Soul is also going to be helping out as well. It truly builds into that fantasy of having just a ton of turrets and just, you know, doing some of the work yourself, but getting some help from your buddies. And you know, if you're curious about the other weapon that I was talking about, if you played Beyond Light, I'm talking about No Time to Explain, which I haven't used in such a long time, but the trait Time Slip at 10 stacks of rewind, again, a small portal will open, shooting bullets from an alternate timeline version of this weapon. Precision hits extend the portal's duration. So, that's right. This is another turret you can use, because it's not just shooting rounds from this gun. It's like a little turret that pops up on the side of this gun and shoots with you. And nice thing about this is if you look at the intrinsic trait, which is rewind again, precision shots and shots against combatants slowed or frozen by stasis will return to the magazine. So with this Bilhan, it kind of builds into it with this trait. Of course, this weapon did come out when stasis came out, so you know, again, it kind of makes sense for this to be a thing, and it builds into the whole buddy thing. So if you haven't gotten your Finality's Augur to drop yet, this is a way you can still be part of that power fantasy and have that turret. Of course, you do have to hit your shots, whereas with Finality's Augur, you just have to switch the mode and shoot the turret up. So, you know, good luck with that. But, you know, I might try out No Time with this. No Time's not good right now. It was really meta for PvP for a while, but it's fallen off for the most part. I'm sure it's still okay. But yeah, that's it. Enjoy the rest of the gameplay. Let me know what your thoughts are on the build, or if you have any thoughts to maybe improve this. And so yeah.